Welcome to Globeshift Media, where maps aren't just redrawn. They're rewritten by the forces of power, politics, and change. Make sure to like and subscribe to Globeshift Media so you never miss the stories that shape our world. The Aluminum Tariff War, how America first backfired and sparked Canada's industrial rise. Imagine waking up to find that your closest ally, your #1 trading partner, and your most reliable supplier has suddenly been labeled an economic threat. That's what happened in February 2025, when the United States dropped a tariff bombshell on Canada's aluminum industry. The move was supposed to be a patriotic shield for American jobs. Instead, it triggered one of the most costly trade wars in modern North American history, reshaping defense supply chains, green technology, and even the balance of industrial power on the continent. This is the story of how America first turned into America alone, and how Canada transformed tariffs into triumph. Chapter 1. The Spark That Lit the Fuse. On February 9th, 2025, the newly inaugurated 47th USA President announced a sweeping 50% tariff on Canadian aluminum, stacking an additional 25% duty on top of existing levies. The White House framed it as a defense of American jobs. Speeches invoked imagery of roaring furnaces and reborn steel towns. But the target wasn't China or Russia, it was Canada. Why Canada? Because in 2024, nearly 80% of USA aluminum imports came from Canada, most of it smelted in Quebec, using hydropower. The USA, by contrast, had only 4 functioning smelters producing a modest 700,000 tons, annually a fraction of its consumption. Canada, meanwhile, churned out 3.3 million tons, with Quebec alone hosting 10 massive smelting facilities. In other words, America's tariff strike wasn't on arrival. It was on the very supplier, keeping its economy and military humming. Chapter 2. Shockwaves through industry. When tariffs took effect in March 2025, the impact was immediate and brutal. The Midwest aluminum premium, a key benchmark, spiked from 24 to 68 per pound. That surge translated to nearly $1,500 per ton, adding billions in costs for automakers, aerospace firms, and electronics producers. Ford warned the tariffs would cost it $3 billion in 2025 alone, roughly $1,500 per vehicle. General Motors projected $4 to $5 billion in losses. Boeing flagged $1.2 billion in added costs within just 6 months, threatening the timelines of the F-35 fighter and 777X jet. Apple reported $1.1 billion in quarterly costs, driven by aluminum used in laptops and iPhones. Even Stanley Black & Decker warned of hundreds of millions in extra expenses. Factories cut shifts. At Alcoa's Davenport Works in Iowa, 3 shifts shrank to 1. In Youngstown, Ohio, dreams of reviving the Steel Valley were dashed again. And American consumers? They paid the hidden tax. Durable goods inflation jumped 4.3% year over year, with vehicles, appliances, and even beer cans costing more. By late 2025, Goldman Sachs estimated USA households were absorbing 67% of tariff costs, an invisible levy quietly draining family budgets. Chapter 3. Defense Implications, a supply chain under siege. Here's the irony. Tariffs meant to secure U.S. industry actually undermine USA national security. According to Pentagon data, 42% of high-purity aerospace aluminum came from Canada. For some missile and satellite programs, that reliance was as high as 60%. Aluminum isn't just for soda cans. It's the backbone of fighter jets, armored vehicles, missile casings, and satellites. When use of smelters slowed and imports shrank, procurement costs skyrocketed. A Congressional Budget Office, CBO, report warned of $1.3 billion in additional defense, spending over 2 years due to volatility. By mid-2025, Canada's Rio Tinto was even prioritizing NATO partners over American contractors. The U.S. suddenly found itself begging its ally for the very resource it had just taxed into oblivion. Even worse, nearly half of U.S. aerospace suppliers were tied to Canadian clean tech firms. A political rift now risks derailing both defense readiness and the green tech transition. Chapter 4. Canada's countermove strategy over rhetoric. While Washington thundered about patriotism, Ottawa played chess. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government didn't retaliate with equal tariffs. Instead, it executed a quiet but surgical pivot. CAD $1.5 billion investment modernized Quebec's all-wet smelter, boosting efficiency. CAD $2.3 billion expansion of the Port of Saguenay added a 375 kilometers rail upgrade, creating direct shipping routes to Europe and Asia, bypassing U.S. ports entirely. Aluminum was declared a strategic national asset, guaranteeing subsidies and long-term protection. Canada inked tariff-free contracts with the EU, Japan, and the UK. The strategy wasn't just about exports, it was about aligning with the future. Europe's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, takes effect in 2026, penalizing high-carbon imports. Quebec's hydropower smelters, among the greenest in the world, gave Canada a perfect fit. USA smelters, reliant on fossil fuels, were headed for €200 per ton penalties in the EU market. By mid-2025, Canada had signed a €4.6 billion green tech partnership with the EU, a 15-year clean energy aluminum deal with Japan, expanded access to Pacific trade packs for EVs and batteries. Exports soared 23% to the EU and 20% to Asia in just 1 year. Companies from Airbus to BMW to Tesla flocked to Canada for predictable, low-carbon supply. Chapter 5. Building the Green Tech Corridor. What Washington saw as a blow, Ottawa turned into a springboard. By linking aluminum to EVs and batteries, Canada began constructing what analysts now call the North American Green Tech Corridor. EV exports rose 22% in 2024 and are projected to double by Stellantis and LG committed CAD $5 billion to a Windsor battery plant. Lithium projects in Quebec and Manitoba are set to add 3,500 tons of annual output by 2026. Ontario's EV corridor now links hydropower aluminum frames, lithium-ion batteries, and automobile assembly plants, all powered by renewable energy. And Canada didn't stop at the civilian market. Through a CAD $1.8 billion dual-use initiative, Ottawa ensured the same supply chains serve both civilian and military needs. One aluminum ingot might become a Tesla EV chassis or a NATO-certified fighter fuselage. That dual leverage is now reshaping defense procurement. Germany reports that Canadian EV batteries and defense aluminum already share 70% of supply chains, cutting procurement delays by 25%. The US and its clean tech exporters are stuck with soaring input costs, foreign tariffs, and buyers increasingly wary of Washington's unpredictability. Chapter 6. Washington doubles down. Rather than recalibrate, Washington escalated. In spring 2025, the White House floated a second wave of tariffs, another 25% on Canadian imports not covered by USMCA. Some levies stacked as high as 50%. Markets reacted instantly. Canadian exports to the USA fell 6.6%. Exports to the EU jumped 24.8%. Sales to ASEAN markets rose 11.2%. Economists called it a permanent rerouting of trade flows. Meanwhile, American families kept paying the bill. Business Insider reported that tariffs had lifted USA appliance and electronics costs 7.5% by mid-2025, with more hikes expected. The bitter irony? Even if America restarted every idled smelter tomorrow, it would still face a 3 million ton annual shortfall. Building a new plant would cost $5 billion and take 5 years. Chapter 7. Beyond aluminum, Canada's resource arsenal. The tariff war didn't just stop at aluminum. It spilled into other critical minerals where Canada holds the upper hand. Nickel. Canada supplied 46% of USA imports in 2024. Crude oil. 87% of USA imports came from Alberta. Uranium. Saskatchewan exported $2.8 billion worth, vital for U.S. Nuclear energy. Potash. Key for USA agriculture. Ontario alone conducts $368 billion in annual trade with the USA, making it. Tariffs began eroding that very foundation. As one Canadian premier put it, a partnership that took generations to build can be destroyed by a single policy decision. Chapter 8. Canada's professionalism versus Washington's chaos. If trade policy is a poker game, Ottawa played calm and collected while Washington threw the cards in frustration. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc and Ambassador Kirsten Hillman-Greer projected steadiness in every negotiation. Meanwhile, U.S. messaging shifted wildly, sometimes calling Canada a friend, other times labeling it a strategic rival. American CEOs blasted the chaos privately. One Fortune 500 executive was quoted saying Washington was behaving like a petulant child. In contrast, European officials praised Canada's predictability. In a world of fragile supply chains, predictability is priceless. Chapter 9. The industrial gravity shifts north. By late 2025, the scorecard was undeniable. USA industries paid more, produced less, and lost markets. Canada gained contracts, global clout, and infrastructure investment. Allies shifted supply chains northward, treating Ottawa as a first-stop partner. What began as a tariff tantrum in Washington became a strategic rerouting of North America's industrial future. A Canadian engineer summed it up best. We used to worry about what Detroit needed. Now we ship to Osaka, Munich, and Stockholm. The world is much bigger than one market. Chapter 10. Conclusion: a self-inflicted wound. The verdict is clear. The USA tariffs didn't protect America, they weakened it. They raised costs for consumers and manufacturers, deepened U.S. defense dependence on Canadian supply, handed Canada dominance in green tech exports, accelerated a permanent shift of industrial power north of the 49th parallel. For the U.S., America first became America alone. For Canada, predictability and strategic foresight turned crisis into opportunity. What began as a tariff war is now a turning point in industrial history. The USA exported opportunity northward. Canada seized it and cemented its role as a global green tech and defense powerhouse. Final word: trade wars don't always break enemies. Sometimes they forge stronger allies, just not in the way Washington intended. You've been watching Globeshift Media, decoding the shifts that redefine nations and redraw the world map. Stay informed, stay ahead, and remember to like and subscribe to Globeshift Media, where every shift matters.